The night Carlos Santana stopped a concert for a girl nobody expected, the arena didn't erupt into noise. It went silent. 12,000 people, a sold-out floor at the Hard Rock Hotel in Las Vegas, every stage light burning, every monitor humming, the fog rolling low across the boards like something out of a dream. And Carlos Santana, 71 years old, fedora pulled low, the amber body of his guitar catching the light the way it had caught light on 1,000 stages before this one, standing perfectly still at the edge of the platform. Not playing, not speaking, just listening. Because from somewhere in the third row, a voice had risen above the crowd. Not a scream, not a fan shouting a request, a voice. Unhurried, clear, and so completely, impossibly centered in pitch and feeling that 3 members of Santana's band stopped mid-motion where they stood. The sound engineer in the booth pulled his headphones from his ears. A security guard froze mid-step on the arena floor and turned toward the source of the sound without understanding why his body had made that decision before his mind had. The voice was singing the opening verse of Black Magic Woman, his song, his signature. The song that had lived in his hands and his soul for 50 years. And it was coming from a teenage girl in a pink sparkle dress with her eyes closed and her hand pressed flat against her chest. Carlos Santana took one step toward the edge of the stage, then another, and then he did something that no tour manager, no security protocol, no arena procedure in the world had prepared for. He knelt down, and he listened. What happened next would change both of their lives forever. But what Carlos didn't know yet, what nobody in that arena knew, was the secret that girl had been carrying for 6 weeks, and the secret her father had been carrying alone for 3. If you've never heard this story, stay right here, because the truth behind that smile will break you wide open. Subscribe now so you never miss a story like this one. To understand what happened in that arena, you have to go back 14 months. All the way back to a small house on Cypress Street in a quiet neighborhood outside San Antonio, Texas. February 2018. A wind chime on the front porch. A vegetable garden along the side fence that Rosa Vega tended every Saturday morning without fail. A rusted basketball hoop in the driveway that her husband Miguel had been promising to replace for 6 years and never did, because, as Rosa always said, some things about a man never change, and you learn to love those things too. Miguel Vega had grown up on Santana records. Not casually, not the way most people have a favorite artist they return to sometimes. Deeply. The way a man returns to something that kept him standing during the years when standing was hard. His own father had brought a battered turntable across the border wrapped inside a wool blanket, and the first record he had ever placed on it, in a kitchen in San Antonio with bare walls and 2 chairs, was Abraxas. Miguel had been 7 years old. He had sat on the floor and listened to the whole side without moving. He never learned to play guitar. He never went to a concert. But he knew every lyric Carlos Santana had ever recorded, and every night after dinner, without exception, he would sit in the worn leather armchair in the living room and play the records while his 3 daughters did their homework at the kitchen table. Elena was his youngest. She was 17 years old and she had Down syndrome, diagnosed at birth in a San Antonio hospital by a doctor who had given Miguel and Rosa a careful, measured speech about developmental timelines and managing expectations. Miguel had listened to every word. Then he had driven home, walked into the living room, put on Supernatural, and sat in the dark for 2 hours. But Elena grew up rewriting every expectation anyone had ever quietly placed on her. She had learned to read at 5. She could name every Spurs starter from the 1999 championship roster. She remembered the birthday of every person she had ever loved. And somewhere between her 9th and 10th birthday, in a way nobody in the family could quite trace back to a single moment, she had discovered that she could sing. Not hum, not approximate. Sing, with pitch, with control, with an emotional weight that made Rosa stop mid-task, wet hands and all, and stand in the doorway and stare. What Rosa didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that Elena had already chosen the song she was going to sing when the moment finally came. The tickets had been Miguel's idea, and like most of Miguel's best ideas, he had kept it entirely to himself until the moment arrived to reveal it. He had started saving in April 2018, not in a bank account, in a coffee tin on the top shelf of the garage, the one Rosa never touched because she assumed it contained screws and electrical tape. Every week, whatever he could pull from his paycheck after the bills and the groceries and Elena's speech therapy appointments, he folded and pressed into that tin. By December, he had enough. 3rd row, floor level, 3 seats. One for himself, one for Rosa, one for Elena. The best seats he had ever purchased for anything in his life, including the chairs at his own wedding reception, which he and Rosa had rented from a church hall in 1999 for $40. He hid the ticket envelope inside the cover of his old Abraxas vinyl. Then he waited for Christmas morning. When he set the envelope on the kitchen table, Rosa had picked it up slowly. She had looked at the tickets, then at Elena, then back at the tickets. She had not said it was too much. She had not told him to return them. She had pulled him into a hug and whispered something against his shoulder in Spanish that Elena later described with complete certainty as the happiest she had ever seen her parents in the same moment. But there was something Miguel had not told Rosa that morning, something he had been carrying since the 2nd week of November. He had gone to the doctor twice that month. The first visit had flagged an abnormality in his blood work. The second visit, 7 days later, had given that abnormality a name: Stage 2 pancreatic cancer. The oncologist had been thorough and precise and kind in the way that doctors are kind when the news requires it. Miguel had sat in the plastic chair across from her desk and asked one question only: "Can I make it to March?" The doctor had looked at him carefully. She had said, "We're going to do everything we can." Miguel had driven home. He had walked into the living room. He had put on Santana III and sat in the leather armchair and listened to the entire record without moving a single time. He told no one. Not Rosa, not his daughters, not his brother in Houston who called every Sunday. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Elena had her own secret running parallel to his in the dark. Every night for 6 weeks, after her parents' bedroom light went off, she had been standing in front of the bathroom mirror with the door closed and the exhaust fan running, practicing one song, the same song, note by note, breath by breath, Black Magic Woman. Not for school, not for anyone who had asked, for the moment she had already decided was coming. Don't go anywhere, because what Elena does on that stage, and what Carlos Santana learns about her father, is going to stop your heart completely. The night of March 14th, 2019, Miguel Vega wore his best shirt. Rosa had ironed it twice without being asked. She had noticed things in recent months, the way he moved slower in the mornings, the way he sometimes stopped in the middle of a sentence and looked at nothing for a moment before continuing. But she had not pushed. She had ironed the shirt twice and said nothing, because 20 years of marriage teaches a woman the difference between a secret a man will share and a secret a man is protecting you from. Elena came downstairs in the pink sparkle dress, and Miguel had laughed for the first time in 3 weeks. A real laugh. The kind that starts in the chest. "You look like you're going to the Grammys, mija." Elena had straightened the skirt with both hands and looked at him with complete seriousness. "Maybe I am, puppy." They arrived at the Hard Rock Hotel 2 hours before doors opened. Miguel walked slowly through the crowd, and Elena held his hand the way she had when she was 9 years old, and the world felt too wide and too loud. Rosa walked on his other side. Nobody spoke much. There was nothing that needed saying. They found their seats in the 3rd row, and Elena looked up at the stage, the towering guitar-shaped lights, the amber glow of the drum riser, the fog drifting slow and low across the monitor wedges, and she grabbed her father's arm with both hands and held it. "Papi," she said quietly, "this is real." He placed his hand over hers and pressed it there. "This is real, Elena." For 2 hours, Carlos Santana played with everything he had. Miguel stood for every song. Rosa filmed on her phone until her storage ran out. Elena sang along to every lyric of every song because she knew every lyric of every song. She had known them since she was 10 years old, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework with the records playing in the next room. And then, deep into the encore, with the crowd already spent and electric, Santana stepped back to the center microphone, reset his guitar strap across his shoulder, and played the opening riff of Black Magic Woman. Elena Vega stopped singing along. Her eyes closed. Her hand rose slowly to her chest and pressed flat against the pink sparkle fabric. And from somewhere deeper than rehearsal, deeper than 6 weeks of bathroom mirrors and running exhaust fans, she opened her mouth and she sang. What came out was not what the woman behind them expected. It was not what the man to their left expected. It was not endearing in the careful, generous way that people describe when they are being kind about someone they did not anticipate being remarkable. It was true. Pitch perfect and emotionally precise, with a breath control and a vibrato that professional vocalists train for years to develop and some never find at all. Within 8 seconds, a circle of silence had expanded outward from Elena Vega like a stone dropped into still water, person by person, row by row, until the noise of 12,000 people had pulled back from her like a tide. Carlos Santana heard it at the exact moment the circle reached the stage. He turned from the microphone. He looked out into the house lights. His right hand dropped from the strings. He took one step toward the edge of the stage, then another. And then he waved her forward, not as an invitation, not as a kind gesture from a famous man, as a recognition. The way one musician recognizes another across a room full of noise. The security guard at the stage steps looked at the tour manager. The tour manager looked at Carlos. Carlos looked at neither of them. Elena looked at Miguel. And Miguel Vega, standing in the third row in his best ironed shirt, 4 months into a diagnosis that had rearranged every quiet moment of his life. A man who had saved in a coffee tin and hidden tickets in a vinyl sleeve and carried something enormous without letting it touch his daughters, looked at Elena and said the only thing left to say. Go, mija. Go. She walked up those stage steps alone. She took the microphone Carlos Santana held out with both hands. 12,000 people held completely still. And then she sang the rest of Black Magic Woman on the stage of the Hard Rock Hotel in Las Vegas, while her father stood in the third row with tears running down his face, and his best shirt creased at the sleeves from where she had been holding his arm. When the last note ended, Carlos Santana did not applaud. He stood completely still. And then, very quietly, in a voice the microphone caught and sent across the entire arena, he asked her one question. Who taught you this song? Elena turned. She pointed into the crowd. Third row. Miguel Vega, standing, both hands pressed to his mouth now, tears catching the arena light on his face like something holy. The arena came apart, but Carlos had gone somewhere quiet inside himself, somewhere that had nothing to do with 12,000 people screaming. After the show, Carlos Santana did not go to the green room. His tour manager found him standing at the side of the stage, still in his fedora, guitar hanging from the leather strap, watching the last of the crowd filter out through the floor exits. The house lights had come up. The fog machines had gone cold. The arena was transitioning from something sacred back into something ordinary. Concrete floors and folding chairs and the smell of warm electrical equipment. And Carlos was standing in the middle of that transition like a man who was not ready for it yet. Car, the after-event reception starts in 20, Carlos said. Find that family. It took the crew 9 minutes to locate the Vegas in the corridor outside Section 4. Rosa was still crying in the quiet, continuous way of someone who has been crying for a while and no longer notices. Elena was holding a microphone cable clip that one of the stage crew had pressed into her hand as she came down the steps, turning it over and over between her fingers without looking at it. And Miguel was leaning against the concrete wall with his arms folded across his chest and his eyes closed, composed in the careful way of a man who is using every remaining resource he has to stay composed. When Carlos came around the corner and found them, Miguel opened his eyes and straightened immediately. Rosa covered her mouth. Elena said simply and completely, Mr. Santana. Carlos crossed to Miguel first. He took his hand and held it. Not a handshake, something slower than that. He said, Your daughter has a gift that cannot be taught. It can only be given by something larger than any of us. Miguel nodded. He started to speak. His voice caught. He stopped. Carlos looked at him with the attention of a man who has spent 70 years listening for what lies underneath the surface of things. And then he asked quietly, "Are you all right, my friend?" That was the question that opened the door Miguel had kept shut since November. He didn't say everything. He didn't say the oncologist's exact words, or the name of what they were fighting, or the number of mornings he had sat in the leather armchair and calculated time. But he said enough. He said he had bought the tickets before he knew. He said Elena had practiced in secret, and he hadn't known that either. He said that when she walked up those stage steps, something had shifted in his chest that he did not have a word for in English or Spanish. Carlos Santana listened without moving, without interrupting, without looking away. Then he reached up and lifted the leather guitar strap from his own shoulder, the one his wife had placed there the night before their first sold-out show, the one he had worn at every significant performance for 5 years, and he held it out to Miguel Vega with both hands. "This belongs where the music lives," he said. "Take it home. If this story is hitting you the way it should, share it right now with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. We find the stories that never make headlines but change everyone who hears them." Miguel Vega began chemotherapy in April 2019. He responded better than the careful, measured language of his oncologist had prepared him to expect. By August, the markers had shifted in the right direction. By December, he was in partial remission, a phrase that sounds clinical until it is the phrase that belongs to your father, and then it sounds like an answered prayer in a language you didn't know you were speaking. He still sat in the leather armchair every night after dinner. He still played the records. But now Elena sometimes pulled a chair next to his instead of sitting at the kitchen table, and they listened to the whole side together without talking, the way two people listen when they have already said everything that matters, and what's left is just the music. The guitar strap from Carlos Santana hung on the living room wall above the turntable, not framed behind glass, not mounted on a display bracket, just hung on a single nail the way you hang something that belongs to a life rather than a collection. Rosa dusted it on Saturdays when she dusted everything else. Miguel never touched it. He didn't need to. Seeing it there every evening when he sat down was enough. Carlos heard about the remission through his team 6 months after the concert. He sent no press release. He gave no interview. He made no public gesture of any kind. He wrote one handwritten note and sent it to the house on Cypress Street in San Antonio. Rosa read it at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning while Miguel was at his appointment. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully along its original crease, walked into the living room, and slid it inside the cover of Miguel's Abraxas vinyl, the same record where he had once hidden 3 concert tickets in a coffee-stained envelope. Some things are only meant for the people they were written for. There is a version of this story where Carlos Santana is the hero, the famous man who knelt at the edge of the stage, who waved a girl forward, who unclipped a guitar strap and pressed it into a stranger's hands. That version is easy to tell. It is not wrong. But it is not the story. The story is Miguel Vega, a man who saved in a coffee tin for 11 months while carrying a diagnosis he hadn't told his wife, who stood in the 3rd row with tears on his face and said 2 words that contained everything a father can give. Go, mija. Go. The story is Elena pressing her hand to her chest and closing her eyes and pouring every quiet night, every bathroom mirror, every record she had absorbed through the wall of her father's living room into a single song. The story is what music does when it passes between people across ordinary evenings, across dinner tables and worn armchairs, and the kind of love that never announces itself. Carlos Santana has played every major stage on earth, and since that night in Las Vegas, he has said the most powerful voice he ever heard was not in a concert hall. It was in the 3rd row, from a girl in a pink sparkle dress, with her eyes closed, and her hand pressed flat against her heart. If this story moved you, subscribe right now and hit the bell. Every week we find the stories the world almost missed. Don't miss the next one.